Let's watch a CNN breakdown that MAGA just hates to see coming as they cover more updates of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, notably the successes of Ukraine, especially recently, and overall just debunking some of the good old Kremlin talking points you see commonly used by Republicans, MAGA, and Trump. So let's run through this and discuss what it actually means, aside from the Kremlin talking points you'll hear on Twitter from MAGA.
Ukrainian President Zelensky says the Russian army lost up to a battalion of North Korean soldiers who've now joined Moscow's fight and some Russian paratroopers. If that's in fact accurate, how impactful is that sort of defeat?
Well, it could be up to 1,000 soldiers that would be lost in a situation like that. Normal battalion size in the Russian military is somewhere between 600 and 800 soldiers, depending on the type of battalion. So let's cut it in half and say about 500 were lost. That's still somewhat significant in a specific operation. Now, it's not going to change the course of the war by itself. It's also not going to change exactly what the Russian goals are, but it could have a momentum of its own. And actions like this, if the Russians were in fact, and the North Koreans were in fact in a situation where they lost that many people, that could have a significant impact on their ability to carry forth operations.
Just to put this a little bit more into perspective, the yellow here in this picture is the territory Russia had been occupying either at the start of this conflict or some point since 2014, the Crimea invasion, to where the conflict, once it started, Ukraine, just by fighting and pushing Russia back, has regained almost 30,000 square miles of territory. What they've regained is bigger than 10 states, to help put 30,000 miles in perspective, right? It's like 1,000 miles away from being bigger than like 13 or 14 states. So there's like a couple states just barely bigger than it. If you ask MAGA, however, none of this matters. Ukraine is losing. They've made no progress, and it's a pointless war that America is wasting taxpayer dollars on, even though most American taxpayer dollars aren't leaving the American economy. We're buying weapons for ourselves, creating more jobs. Nonsensical points. Again, Kremlin talking points. But they're just spewing this to hide from the fact that Ukraine is actually being wildly successful in pushing back our main adversary, if not one of our two main adversaries, which is something that like anyone should support. Trump is doing this knowingly. MAGA is mostly doing it by default of Trump saying it. But, some of them are doing it because they're paid. Tim Pool, Dave Rubin, and I'm sure there's plenty of bots being paid in my comments as well. But it's clear, again, the Ukrainian army has liberated their land. They've been successful in their goal. It's successful us by proxy of moving Russia away from NATO countries and by showing that they're no match for our weaponry. So let alone would they want to try our actual forces, it'll make them think twice before escalating in a way that would actually have us retaliating with boots on the ground, which should be the goal with any foreign aid spending we send.
President-elect Trump returning to the White House in just about 2 weeks. He said many times he plans to end the war on day one. I think it's becoming pretty clear that that's going to be almost impossible. But President Zelensky says that Trump's, quote, strength and unpredictability could help bring an end to the war. Where do you think this is going to go?
Well, I think what will happen, Jessica, is that there are going to be efforts made by the new Trump administration to actually end the conflict, at least the hot phase of the conflict. Now, whether or not Russia plays ball is another question. If Russia does not agree to some kind of a ceasefire or at least a cessation of hostilities, then I could see the potential for the Trump administration to actually ramp up aid to the Ukrainians. In fact, Lieutenant General Kellogg, the special representative for Ukraine, has made such a statement. So if that does in fact happen, it could actually put more pressure on the Russians to end the war, or at least end their participation.
What's going to happen is Trump probably has some half-assed backroom deal with Putin. I mean, we know they were having secret conversations. We know the documents that he tried to hide were possibly could have been involved, sort of like a quid pro quo, right? And if this fails, which it probably will, I mean, I don't see Zelensky signing on to like giving away his territory to the extent Trump is like whispering that he's going to do. we'll probably just fall back to the norm of like sending Ukraine the typical aid, and MAGA just will stop mentioning it because it's Trump in office. So of course now it can't be an attack on Democrats. And then when Zelensky like inevitably defeats the Russian forces, or Russia decides to withdraw or surrender because they're not making any progress and taking losses, MAGA will then pretend that the achievement is one for Trump, even though Trump doesn't want any involvement in the region. MAGA pushed him to not be involved in the region, and all of the progress and gains, support, aid has been made under Biden. They'll still say Trump is the bringer of peace, like, and again, at every step of the way, Trump has been saying sending this aid has been the wrong thing to do. But like, it's just another thing that I know is going to come from the correlation is causation MAGA crowd, and I just can't wait for it.
But if that is in fact, the course of events where there is a of a ceasefire, we may see a situation kind of like what we're seeing on the Korean Peninsula, where there is a de facto peace, but it is in fact still a state of war. That could be one possible outcome of this. There's a type of ceasefire, or at least an armistice, but no real resolution to the issue, and no movement of troops beyond what we see today.
And I want to be very clear here about where we are. We are definitely on the edge of some sort of like a ceasefire or peace deal, or Russia wanting to negotiate or pull troops out of the region. Russia hasn't been able to make any strategic progress in months. On top of that, as we've showed, again, Ukraine liberated over 30,000 square miles from Ukraine. They're flanking Russia on the opposite side, where now they've actually pushed into Russia. And North Korea is taking losses in troops to the numbers that they didn't expect. I mean, again, it's essentially just not ended yet because it's a lame duck period, and countries look to us before they act. So what's going on is Putin is probably holding off on moving in either direction. In the last-ditch effort that Trump is going to come in, stick to the guns he ran on, and pull all Ukraine aid, be like an isolationist, all of this, because if he does, Russia could catch a second wind in this conflict, very much so. But if Trump doesn't, ultimately, the conflict is on its last breath and it's a dying fire. And seeing as, again, more than likely Trump won't be able to overstep Congress and actually stop sending Ukraine aid, like this was just a lie on the campaign trail, we undoubtedly are going to have to deal with the other side of this, where, yeah, Ukraine's going to get its sovereignty, but we have to deal with MAGA clowns to the end of time, taking all of Biden's work in the region and attributing it to Trump, despite Trump saying we shouldn't have done any of it, and that inevitably leading us to the peace deal. But they don't care about context or anything like that. Again, like when Russians are forced to withdraw at the hands of weapons provided by the Biden administration, it's still going to be a Trump win.